Hi again. In J.K. von Baalen's great book, The Chaos of Cults, we've reached Chapter 1, The Issue Defined. In a recent study of Bavinck as a dogmatician, that's Herman Bavinck, the famous Dutch theologian of 100 years ago, the noted Dutch scholar Dr. G.C. Berkouwer remarks that Bavinck's great work on dogmatics in 1918 is by no means antiquated, and that not only because the truth according to Scripture remains unaltered, but even more so because Bavinck's magnum opus contains much that is of an apologetic and polemic nature. And, says Berkouwer, in reading Bavinck, one is again and again impressed with the fact that many of the problems that engaged the mind of the great Dutch theologian have returned in our own day with but slight variations. Thus, the demythologizing of which Boltzmann now speaks in Germany differs but very little from the antipathy of the older, higher critics to miracles in the Bible. This also holds for the cults. There is little that is new under the sun, or how could there be when Spiritists boldly claim their religion to be the oldest and most fundamental of human cults, when Theosophists call their system now esoteric Buddhism, and at another time esoteric Christianity. There is, however, at once an amount of progress and of historical development, and that calls for new and revised editions. The founders of the more popular cults are by no means all finished scholars. Too often they are bunglers who stumble upon an idea and afterward bolster it with pickings from many fields. Now, he's saying all this, of course, before the 1970s. He died in 1968, so he could not know that just, within a year or two after his death, the New Age movement would come on with a lot of influences from this esoteric Christianity, Theosophy. The New Age movement is really birthed by, you might say, its grandmothers, people like Alice Bailey and Madame Blavatsky in the 19th century. The New Age movement could hardly have got started without them. So yes, he's quite right. These things just don't go away. He says, in the case of some religious systems, later changes are mostly a slightly different emphasis, such as the case with modernism, which now lays more stress upon sin, but loathes the scriptural doctrine of justification by faith as much as ever. Here, therefore, a few citations from more modern works should suffice to show that liberal theology has altered but little in its opposition to the biblical doctrine of an alien and forensic righteousness imputed to man. What is new in a chapter like that will therefore be found in the second part, which gives quotations from various authors. Quite to the contrary, the change from the old Buckmanism to the new moral rearmament, that is MRA, has been so great that a chapter had to be largely rewritten, although much of the material of the early history has been retained. I have deemed it necessary to add but one more cult. Where is the end? Namely, Swedenborgianism. Perhaps because in Edmonton, Alberta, where I lived from 1950 to 1955, much house-to-house canvassing was done during my stay. More and more I have come to the conclusion that we can learn from cultists, not only noting what not to believe, but also bearing in mind that the cults are the unpaid bills of the church. He has the last chapter in this book is by that title, by the way, The Cults are the unpaid bills of the church. In general, it may be stated that the cults are gradually dropping some of the old belligerency. Even Jehovah's Witnesses are more sparing of vehement invectives. Having obtained a hearing and a following, they no longer go about carrying a chip on their shoulder. One might ask whether that is still true. George Channing, CSB, writes, quote, "The Christian Scientist does not feel superior to the adherents of any denomination. Every man is free to demonstrate the efficacy of his own faith. Each is entitled to encouragement in his pursuit of spiritual objectives." Mrs. Eddy, that is Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, said, "A genuine Christian Scientist loves Protestant and Catholic, DDs and MDs, loves God, good, and he loves his enemies. The newer spirit of ecumenicity, worldwide unity, finds an eloquent expression in such books as Radhakrishnan, Comparative Studies in Philosophy. Presented in honor of his 60th birthday, that is 1950, here a group of 20 scholars from Asia, England, and America openly suggest a philosophical synthesis of East and West, which will, in its own way, contribute to the growth of a world community. To these men, religion is not a creed or a code, but an insight into reality. If only the West will give up its age-old prejudice against reincarnation, it would be discovered that East and West are not so far apart. And of course this got new blood also as after von Baalen died in the New Age movement. And Professor Toynbee states that the Western world must produce a new religion, a universal cult, and it must be made up of Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam. A contributor to the letterbox of the Edmonton Journal in 1955 wrote, quote, "Christianity expresses belief in one God, in life everlasting for each individual soul, and in the status of women as persons. By contrast, Hinduism expresses belief in many gods, Buddhism in the eventual absorption of one's soul into nirvana, and Islam holds for the predominance of the male sex, among other things. Yet with terrifying calm, the professor, that's Toynbee, announces that there must be a synthesis of these religions, which have divergent fundamental beliefs. Truly, his universal religion would belong to a composite order of architecture, a nightmare edifice looking like a combination of the Mosque of St. Sophia, Bombay Temple, and Reims Cathedral, with probably a gigantic image of Buddha dominating the interior." This is a piece with the words of the late Dean Inge, who wrote of Buddhism and Christianity. There is a cardinal affinity between the two religions in their attitude toward their divinized founders. There are differences due to the historical circumstances in which the two religions have grown up and of the different demands of the peoples they were intended to lead. But the religious foundation of both is the same. But in the words of John A. Mackay, president of Princeton Theological Seminary, quote, "In the interest of world loyalty, mutuality should be promoted between East and West, each sharing with the other its ideals. But how utterly unreal is such a proposal at a moment in history when the traditional ideals of both East and West are passing away, and when a tremendous force, that of Marxist communism, proclaims around the world that what matters is not the mutuality of ideals, but the common recognition of realities." End of quote. The Bible-believing Christian may easily detect that to which all this is bound to lead. The true Christians will be hated of all men for their aloofness, their refusal to recognize others as equally good. They will be accused of holding back unity and progress, world peace, and similar desirable goods. Probably it will all end in renewed persecution. Boy, he's right about that. Here we are 50 years later, and it's all happening around us. Already the unbalanced genius of Hitler has accused Christianity of standing in the way of the Pax Germana that was to bless the world through the race with the Weltgeist and the world spirit. So, of course, his conclusions are based on information that was all around us in the 1920s, 30s, and through World War II. But yes, his prediction here has come true. The world is a scary place today, and Christianity is being persecuted, at least in the Western world, for the first time since, well, centuries. I'll put in a link to a video we did 6 years back called Slaves of Men, 5 Characteristics of Cultic Groups. And the next time von Baalen is addressing paganism or Christianity? ? See you next time.